Hello, everyone. Good evening. Before we begin, for those of you who need closed captioning, please refer to the link on your screens, which will open a new browser window where closed captioning will be provided. Luis will provide the link in just a moment. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Solve Climate by 2030, the 2021 Maryland Global Dialogue. Thank you so much for taking the time to come together with others across the state, country, and globe as we work toward our goal to solve climate by 2030. My name is Thomas Potter. I'm a senior at Towson University, majoring in informal environmental education and a sustainability project coordinator with the Office of Sustainability. As a student who's committed to environmental justice, I'm the current president of the Student Environmental Organization, founder and chairman of Towson's Young Democratic Socialists of America, and I'm on the executive board of the Mary Purg Student Climate Action Coalition. I'm the master of ceremonies for this event on behalf of Towson University, which has the privilege of being Maryland's host institution. We'd like to begin our event by acknowledging that the grounds on which we operate are the territory of the Piscataway, Nanticoke, and Susquehannock people, who have stewarded this land for many generations. We thank them for their strength and resilience in protecting this land and aspire to uphold our responsibilities according to their example and with their guidance. Tonight's dialogue will focus on current state policies and actions that will drive Maryland to a healthier, smarter, and more just future. After a short presentation by each panelist, our student moderators will ask a series of predetermined questions to our panel, and we will then open up the floor to the audience in the form of the Q&A feature. Feel free to submit your questions throughout the course of the evening, and we will do our best to have our moderators present your questions to the panel. Without further ado, I'm honored to present opening remarks by Eben Goodstein from the Bard Center for Environmental Policy.
Welcome to the Solve Climate Global Dialogues. You're participating in one of 125 events held across the planet, including in almost all 50 U.S. states, part of a global project called Solve Climate by 2030. My name is Eben Goodstein, and I'm an economist and director of the Graduate Programs in Sustainability at Bard College in New York, the lead organizer for Solve Climate. This last year has been difficult for everyone. As the world looks forward to recovery from COVID, we are focusing tonight on the most important question facing humanity. What can we do in this year in our regions to help solve climate change while supporting struggling communities that have faced widespread loss of life, economic disaster, and joblessness? Worldwide, from Australia to Kyrgyzstan, from Colombia to Malaysia, and from South Carolina to South Africa, Solve Climate audiences are hearing from local experts and young leaders about concrete steps that can really help nations solve climate change while creating much-needed jobs and incomes for everybody. The year 2020 was one of the two hottest years in human history, bringing with it massive forest and grassland fires, record-breaking storms and hurricanes, and relentless rising seas. Solving climate is the challenge which the human species must now face. There's hope for the future. Solutions have continued to advance. This year, China committed to building a carbon-neutral economy, while the U.S. rejoined the Paris Agreement. Solar, wind, and battery prices continue to fall, while major car companies have been rushing to electrify the global fleet. Worldwide, Movements for Black Lives Matter and Me Too are leading in bringing much delayed and urgently needed justice to the world. Time is short. We have until 2030, 10 years to solve climate. We can get a lot done in this decade. We have the solutions, but only if we focus the world on climate solutions and justice, and then do the work we have to do in our own cities and regions. For students listening, you are the leaders. Without you, the future we envision will not come. I'm asking tonight for your help. We're going to discover powerful ideas for climate solutions and climate justice and how you can be a part of the solution. But this message must reach beyond those of us who are listening right now. Would you ask all your teachers this week in every subject to make climate a class? The teacher can assign tonight's webinars homework for the students and then afterwards have a one-class period discussion. And we mean every subject, from art to engineering, psychology to business, dance to chemistry. Teachers don't need to be a climate expert to lead a discussion about climate change. The Solve Climate Project has easy-to-use teacher's guides in nearly every subject and in 3 languages to help teachers make climate relevant to their class. It only takes courage. Don't take no for an answer. Ask them, why not? This is your future. You'll be surprised how many teachers will say yes and thank you. Imagine you, thousands of leaders like you around the world asking their teachers once every school term to make climate a class. That means every term going forward, hundreds of thousands, millions of students worldwide in their classes talking about climate solutions. COVID has shown how fragile our global economy and society are to extreme events. It's also shown that vulnerable people are facing the hardest, most damaging impacts. This is also true with climate change. Science has made it clear that unchecked, global warming will mean an unending onslaught of extreme events, causing untold suffering for humanity and all creatures, species driven to extinction, a planet of environmental refugees. And yet, in many ways, this is the most exciting time to ever be alive as a human. We have the tools and networks and technologies to rewire the world with clean energy, reimagine the global food system, reinvent transportation, and regenerate forests and grasslands, and be well on our way to solving climate by 2030. Tonight, we will learn how to do this in our own cities, our own towns, our own regions. Thank you for the work you will do to promote climate solutions and a just world.
And welcome back. I would now like to introduce our esteemed members of the panel and our exceptional student moderators. First up, Stacy Hartwell. As an energy advisor, Stacy has been responsible for the sales and installation of over 40 megawatts of residential, commercial, and industrial solar in Washington, D.C., and the state of Maryland. Her clients include major property management companies, state and local utility, and national and international retail brands, including but not limited to IKEA, DC Water, and Home Depot. In addition, Stacy's work includes helping homeowners adopt over 3 megawatts of solar as part of the DMV's residential energy mix. She has managed solar projects from design to interconnection. Stacy formed her energy expertise as an energy advisor while employed with the energy giant and innovator Tesla. In doing so, she mounted top-down, bottom-up strategies for increasing market share for solar. She developed a grassroots and tops approach to advancing the adoption of solar through faith-based social and community groups, employment retraining organizations, and institutes of higher education. She has lectured to realtors in the Maryland Realtors Association's continuing education program to help agents understand how to market solar. As a community volunteer and advocate, Stacy was appointed as co-chair for environmental and climate justice with the NAACP Maryland State Conference in November 2019. Since then, she has orchestrated the MD Solar Equity Initiative, a solar awareness and jobs campaign, the Earth Day Solar Awareness Project, and Climate Justice is Racial Justice awareness campaign, to name a few. Stacy brings a unique mix of proven technical and industry knowledge, planning, and project management skills to the table. Since graduating from Al Gore's Climate Reality Project, she became heavily involved in increasing community awareness for renewable energy. She was asked to join the NAACP Prince George's County branch as the Environment and Health Chair, working with members, county constituents, local and state government, and environmental coalition partners on green initiatives. Her passion is the environment and for accelerating the adoption of renewable energy to literally help save the planet. Thank you, Stacy. Jennifer Kunzie. Jennifer is the Maryland Program Manager at Clean Water Action, where she organized campaigns on local water, climate, and health policies across the state. In her time at Clean Water Action, she's worked to ban crude oil infrastructure in the Port of Baltimore, improve city policies in responding to sewage backups in homes, improve local water quality and drinking water through the land use policies, and more. She's a lifelong Maryland resident, hailing originally from Frederick and attending St. Mary's College in Southern Maryland before coming to live in Baltimore City. Outside of her work at Clean Water Action, she serves on the board of the Charm City Land Trust, which works to preserve community green space and develop permanently affordable housing in her neighborhood in East Baltimore, and spends a lot of time working at her community garden. Thank you, Jennifer. Delegate Jared Solomon. Delegate Solomon has been a member of the Maryland House of Delegates since 2019. He is a member of the Appropriations Committee, the Oversight Committee on Personnel, the Legislative Transit Caucus, and is an associate member of the Latino Caucus and Women Legislators of Maryland. He is the vice chair of the Education and Economic Development Subcommittee. He began his career teaching social studies at Northwestern High School in Baltimore City. While teaching, he helped restart and coach the school's award-winning debate team. As a teacher, he saw firsthand how ill-conceived policies at the city, state, and federal level could adversely impact his students and their communities. Most recently, Delegate Solomon has agreed to sponsor Mary Perg's Student Climate Action Coalition's Facilitating University Transformations by Unifying Reductions in Emissions Act, House Bill 803, Senate Bill 835, also known as the Future Act. Thank you, Delegate Solomon. Our student moderators for this evening are Olivier Ambush, Reese Barrett, and Carliana Harvey. Olivier Ambush is a junior studying political science and geography at Towson University. His interests include urban planning, racial justice, and climate policy. He serves as the Chief of Staff for the Student Government Association, SGA, and the Director of Diversity and Inclusion for College Democrats of Towson University, CDTU. Reese Barrett is a sophomore chemical engineering student with a minor in sustainability at the University of Maryland College Park. She is also a Banner Key Scholar in the University Honors College and an undergraduate researcher in the Department of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering. Recently, Reese was awarded the Hollings Scholarship, a national scholarship supported by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Reese is the campaign coordinator for the Mary Perg Student Climate Action Coalition, which wrote legislation that is active in the Maryland General Assembly this session. Carliana Harvey is currently a sophomore at Western School of Technology and Environmental Science located in Baltimore County, Maryland. Since the age of 3, she has taken significant interest in environmental and wildlife sciences and plans on working in the field of zoology upon graduation from college. She attended Sudbrook Magnet Middle School, participating in the Environmental Earth Space Science Magnet program before being accepted into the Environmental Technology program at Western. Carliana is also a member of the Western varsity softball team, Western Yearbook Club, and is a junior counselor at programs by the Hemlock Wilderness Brigade Camp. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our panel and moderators in advance for participating in this exceptionally important conversation. For the next 30 minutes, I invite our panelists to reflect on the following 2 questions. What is the most important solution to be implemented in Maryland to advance green recovery climate solutions and a just transition? And what is the most important action that students and others can take to advance these solutions? We'll begin with Stacy Hartwell.
Thanks, Thomas. Good afternoon, everyone. Before I get started, I'd like to acknowledge Towson University's leadership on this important forum. As frontline advocates, our work and our voice have no meaning unless we're heard. So thank you, Luis, Patricia, Carly, and Angela for orchestrating today's convening so we may be heard. And on behalf of the NAACP Maryland State Conference and our conference president, Willie Flowers, I offer greetings to my colleagues on this panel and today's audience. Thank you for zooming in to hear us. I'm going to post my hyperlinks in the chat up front. They are labeled and you can follow along as I make reference to them. So if you give me just 1 second, I will get those posted. Okay, thank you for your patience. The most important solution to be implemented in Maryland, there are hundreds of bills put forth by the state legislature every year. At the NAACP, we don't believe there is one bill that is more important than another. Each piece of legislation often has different impacts and anticipated outcomes. They all have a place. Some bills have a specific focus and intent, and other bills have a specific intent and broad focus. For example, a bill with specific focus and intent would be the Transit Solutions Investment Act, or TSIA, which just yesterday passed the Maryland Assembly and is on its way to the governor's desk for signature. TSIA is a bill which serves the state well. It has robust provisions for equity and the environment, but is specific to transportation. It states, just to give you a little background in a nutshell, strong public transit systems are essential for our state's economy and the environment. However, Maryland's transit system, the MTA, is facing maintenance backlog that threaten its ability to operate. MTA has to receive funding so Marylanders can safely and reliably travel to their essential destinations each day. MTA operates local buses, commuter buses, light rail, regional commuter rail, paratransit, and provides funding to locally operated transit systems in every Maryland county, Baltimore City, Annapolis, and Ocean City. This is important legislation endorsed by our conference. Again, this is specific to transportation. Then there are bills with a specific intent with a broader focus. This type of legislation has impact across all legislation. Legislation like this represents the rising tide that lifts all ships. Because the basic tenets of legislation are broadly focused, it gives a fighting chance to implement and hold people accountable for every piece of climate and environmental justice legislation. And this legislation is what I would like to elevate and discuss today. It is named the Constitutional Amendment for Environmental Rights, House Bill 0082 and Senate Bill 0151. Now, it's been around for a few years, maturing and gaining momentum. One of the issues on why it hasn't passed is it holds people accountable, and some people are afraid to be held accountable, present company excluded, and often don't want their corporate donors to be held accountable either. We believe this amendment will make the greatest impact to the environment and equity above all other bills. This bill has global traction, and Maryland is just a few steps behind the curve in getting it passed. And perhaps with your help, we can get it across the finish line. I want to give a shout out and visibility to the brilliant and bold legislative leaders for putting this amendment forth. They are Delegate Juanica Fisher, District 47B, Prince George's County, Delegate Eric L. Barron, District 24, Prince George's County, Delegate Vaughn Stewart, District 19, Montgomery County, Senator Obie Patterson, District 26, Prince George's County. Saying their names out loud is important. I want you to remember their names when elections come up in 2022. These legislators are heroes. They see the big picture. They aren't afraid of accountability and embrace accountability as a tool of a civilized society. They are carrying forth this legislation, which helps other environmental and climate justice bills have teeth. It holds people and entities accountable. The legislation they have developed is, as I mentioned earlier, the rising tide that lifts all ships. You know, it's rather disappointing. The phrases environmental justice and environmental equity have become buzzwords. They are the latest woke phrases. So many bills will mention environmental equity, but not have elements of the legislation that hold people accountable to deliver just implementation. But this bill is different. House Bill 0082 is an amendment to the Maryland Constitution that Well, yeah, to establish every person has an inalienable right to a healthful environment. It declares that the state's natural resources are the common property of every person, and the state is the trustee of natural and historic resources for the state. It establishes that every person has the right to intervene in an action brought by the state or a political subdivision of the state to protect certain civil rights. We believe this amendment is the best way to ensure environmental justice, both to promote laws and regulations that protect and enforce it, and as a backstop to fight these offenses when government falls short, which brings me to our upcoming elections. I will talk about actions we can take towards legislators who are afraid to be held accountable, who are more beholden to corporations than to the people who elect them. I'll mention that a little bit later. But the Amendment for Environmental Rights formally recognized environmental rights as civil rights, with defined protections which enables communities impacted by environmental injustice to seek out court intervention. You know, unfortunately, race is the #1 indicator of where toxic waste and polluting facilities are located. As a result, pollution and other environmental hazards are concentrated in communities of color, regardless of economic status. The Baltimore-Washington metropolitan region has the nation's second worst ozone problem, the nation's. This pollution is a result of power plants and vehicle emissions, the worst ills required to maintain a society, compounded one on top of another. Many low-wealth communities and many communities of color are concentrated around these facilities and roadways. The evidence of damage caused by pollution or emissions, contamination from runoff, etc., is clear. In Baltimore City, an area most affected by toxic air pollution, mostly from roadway vehicle emissions, also has the highest asthma hospitalization rates in the state. The city's lung cancer rate is more than 25% above the US rate. Baltimore City has among the highest rates of death in the country related to poor air quality. The NAACP Maryland State Conference launched a campaign related to air quality at the beginning of the legislative season in late 2020 to give visibility to the crisis. The initiative is called Climate Justice is Racial Justice. Check it out. The hyperlink is in the chat. Prince George's County is the home to the state's only sewage sludge incinerator. Multiple landfills, asphalt, aggregate industries, as well as huge coal gas power plants. Breathing chronically polluted air can reduce lung function by 20% and can lead to a higher risk of death from COVID. The county was given a grade of F by the American Lung Association. Prince George's County represents 16% of the state's population, but makes up 20% of all COVID-related deaths. And people wonder why these communities are most affected by the pandemic. And then there's Calvert County, which has the highest rate, or among the highest rates, of breast cancer in the country. We have other overburdened communities, which we call hotspots because these areas are in most peril. They are Brandywine, Lothian, Bladensburg, Hyattsville, Baltimore City, and across the bridge, we have gas pipelines slated for permitting in Wicomico and Somerset counties. And finally, sea level rise, saltwater intrusion on farmlands, and persistent sunny day flooding on the eastern and western shores of the Chesapeake Bay, destroying hectares of pristine farm and natural habitats. The Constitutional Amendment for Environmental Rights advocates that the natural resources of the state belong to the people. The state has a responsibility to protect, preserve, and enhance these resources, and that state entities are held responsible for neglecting, endangering, and harming them through the environment. Around the United States, the New York legislature has passed such an amendment just this past month. New Mexico is working on one, as are 10 other states. Around the globe, the global south is leading the way, with Costa Rica being the epicenter. More than 100 constitutions across the world have adopted a human right to a healthy environment, and it often serves as a powerful tool to help protect the natural world. So if you're looking for legislation to adopt and for which to advocate, put the Constitutional Amendment for Environmental Rights on your radar. As I wrap this up, I would like to quote a great article written for Future Planet and published by the BBC.com by Katarina Zimmer on March 16, 2021, and share with you what it says about this type of legislation. You know, it's rather elegant. It states, the human right to a healthy environment encompassing clean and balanced ecosystems, rich biodiversity, and a stable climate recognizes that nature is a keystone of a dignified human existence, in line with a wealth of scientific evidence linking human welfare and the natural world. People depend on thriving ecosystems that clean water and air, yield seafood and pollinators, and soak up greenhouse gases. Recognizing this link can legally greatly strengthen human rights. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Stacy. Next up, we have Jennifer Kunzie.
Sure, thank you so much. I think I want to start out the same place Stacy did in saying that I never say there's one single thing that's the most important solution that's going to solve everything. I think if someone's saying there's one neat trick that the fossil fuel companies don't want you to know, it might be something the fossil fuel companies do want you to know. There's a lot of false solutions that can do a lot of environmental damage floating around out there. I think there's a whole host of things that Maryland needs to do to advance green recovery and climate solutions. And I think Stacy gave a really good big picture of a lot of those, as well as the Human Rights Amendment, which is so, so important. And I want to focus in on sort of a family of solutions to the climate crisis and to a green recovery, which is around how we handle our trash in Maryland at the local and at the state level. And this changing, reforming, completely reinventing the way that we handle our trash is one of the biggest things that Maryland can do to fight climate change, while having a lot of other benefits to Marylanders as well. Saving money at the municipal and state levels, creating new jobs, sequestering carbon, all improving farm operations. All of these things can come out of radically changing how we handle our trash in Maryland. And when you throw trash away, something we all do every day, you might not think that it's a big climate problem, but where that trash came from originally and where it ends up in the end creates a lot of greenhouse gas emissions under our current system. And I want to start at the end point. Most counties in Maryland send their waste to landfills, which are enormous polluters. You can't just throw something in a landfill. It's gone forever. You don't have to say it. You don't have to think about it. Landfills actually emit enormous amounts of methane. And methane is a really powerful greenhouse gas. It's 86 times more potent in causing the climate to warm up than carbon dioxide is. And when organic materials in particular are squashed down in a landfill, they're decomposing, but not with any access to air that promotes healthy bacterial growth. The bacteria that can survive in there produce methane, and that leaks out of the landfills. And this methane leakage from landfills contributes 17% of Maryland's methane, and it's an enormous greenhouse gas problem. So landfills aren't a good place to send our trash. 3 counties in Maryland, Baltimore City, Baltimore County, and Montgomery County, use a different solution, at least as an intermediary step towards landfills, which is incinerators. And I think people who have been following local news, especially in Baltimore City and County, know a lot about incinerators. They burn our trash. Their smokestacks emit a lot of pollutants. Instead of turning those organic wastes into methane, they turn it into carbon dioxide, another greenhouse gas pollutant. But they also create a lot of air pollution, particularly dioxins, and really powerful carcinogens that contribute a lot to cancer and heart disease, respiratory disease, and other health impacts. And they also are enormously expensive to build and to operate. My first exposure to this problem, and really one of the things that set me on the path toward environmental activism, was when I was a high school student in Frederick. And there was a proposal to build a large trash incinerator to handle Frederick County and Carroll County's trash in Frederick City, in the south of Frederick City. It would have been a very polluting facility, very close to 2 elementary schools, and really critically, just around the corner from the county jail, exposing all of the people imprisoned there to that air pollution as well. And there was a really bruising fight over 8 years with local advocates in both counties really coming together to fight that facility off. And ultimately, it was a bipartisan victory with a lot of people coming on board because of the health and climate impacts of incineration, but also a lot of people coming on board because of how enormously expensive this facility would have been and how much better we could handle our waste if we put not even that as much money as the incinerator would have cost into some of these other solutions. So that was a great victory in Frederick County. And we've seen victories against trash incineration all across the state over the past decade. But there's so much more that Maryland needs to do to get rid of our existing incinerators and to stop landfilling so much waste and emitting all of that carbon. And we have a big victory on this issue in the General Assembly this year, just in the last couple of weeks, which is around composting. And composting is a really critical part of taking climate action in Maryland and elsewhere. A lot of our waste stream could be composted if it were separated out, and that's allowing it to get decomposed, not like in a landfill, but with access to air and with appropriate balances so that you create really good, healthy soil amendment. And we can separate out our organic waste, our yard waste, which is usually already separated out, our food waste, which is usually not, and any compostable products that there are so many of them under development right now. And the bill that we passed this year, HB 264, takes the first step towards getting the most food waste out of the solid waste stream and into composting and other programs to divert it away from landfills and incinerators. And this bill says that if you have a business that produces a huge amount of food waste, starting with 2 tons of food waste a week, and then it'll go ratchet down to 1 ton of food waste a week, and if you have the option to send it to an organics recycling facility, whether that's a compost facility or something else, if there is a facility within 30 miles of you that could be taking that waste, if you have that option not to just put it in the trash, then you can't put it in the trash. You can send it to that compost facility, you can compost it yourself, you can separate it out edible food waste, and so much edible food gets thrown out. You can separate that out and send it to food pantries. You just can't put it in the normal trash where it's going to go to a landfill or an incinerator and emit so much pollution. And this bill is really a critical first step to building out the kind of network of compost facilities that we need around Maryland to process our organic waste, our food waste, without having to send it to a landfill or an incinerator. And there are a lot of benefits besides just reducing these greenhouse gas emissions. Compost improves soil health on farms, making our farmland more productive and reducing polluted runoff by soaking up rainwater that falls. This bill will also help the Marylanders who are food insecure, and especially right now during the pandemic, that's critical. About twice as many Marylanders are food insecure now than before the pandemic. And when similar legislation to this passed in Vermont, food donations to pantries and food banks increased by at least 30%. So that makes a really big difference to getting food into the hands of people that need it. And compost also is a critical part of green recovery because it creates jobs. Expanding composting and especially local compost infrastructure can support almost 1,400 new full-time jobs in Maryland, according to a study by the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. And that usable end product of compost also helps with erosion control. So it cleans up our waterways, stormwater management, and increases yields on farms when it's applied to farms. And it creates a lot more jobs than incineration. That to compost, if you think about 10,000 tons of food waste, that amount of food waste per year, if you put that in an incinerator, it takes 1.2 jobs to process that. If you put it in a landfill, it takes 2.1 jobs to process that. If you compost that, it creates over 4 jobs. And so if you multiply that out by the amount of food waste and organic waste that Maryland produces, that will create a lot of good entry-level green jobs for people in our post-pandemic recovery in particular. And then it also saves municipalities money by getting that waste out of the landfill. And our landfills are really filling up in Maryland. It's a problem. So composting our waste is a really critical part of that solution. So I expected to be here tonight begging and pleading for people to contact their legislators for this bill to pass, but really good news, the bill has already passed the legislature and is on its way to Governor Hogan's desk. So that's a really big victory towards this climate solution that also helps out our soil and our food insecure neighbors and our municipal budgets. And there's some other positive steps forward that the legislature took forward on this issue this year, and a lot of room for growth. There's so much more we need to do to change how we manage our waste. The legislature looks to be about to pass a reform to the Maryland Recycling Act, where up until now, trash incineration has counted as recycling, believe it or not. That's in Maryland law. So that's a positive step forward. But there are 2 bills that didn't move forward this year that we'd really like to see the legislature pass in the future. One, it would have banned one of those false solutions that I talked about at the beginning, which is chemical recycling, which in practice sounds like it might be good, just using chemical processes to turn a plastic bottle back into a plastic bottle. But the facilities of this type that we see proposed are actually use these chemical processes to turn plastic back into the fossil fuel that it came from and then burn that for energy. It's incineration with a couple of extra steps, and it increases our reliance on the plastic industry, keeps us reliant on drilling new oil and gas to create new plastics. It's really bad news. And it's an emerging area for the fossil fuel and plastics industries. We've heard there have been new facilities proposed in other states. The industry has been around in Maryland. We may very well see a facility proposal. And so this bill would have been a preemptive ban to just say, no, we're not even going to get started going down this path. This is bad news. We're not going to do it. Another bill that didn't move forward this year is reform to Maryland's Renewable Portfolio Standard, the program by which we subsidize renewable energy. But of course, what do you call renewable energy? Just like Maryland's recycling law, Maryland's renewable energy law says that burning trash counts as renewable energy. And so it's been soaking up those subsidies that were supposed to be going to support new wind and solar development, but instead are just profiting and propping up these old incinerators in Maryland and Virginia that are polluting local communities. So that's a big problem. There's so much more to do. And in terms of the most important action that students can be taking, I would have said support that compost bill and contact your legislators in the last days of session. But overall, it's really just getting involved. The decisions about how to handle our waste happen at the municipal, county, and state levels. And they're enormously complicated, and they happen over a number of years. For example, Baltimore County just wrapped up creating a 5-year tactical plan that's just one piece of the county's plan, multiple plans for how it's going to manage its waste. So look at what's happening in your local county or local town, on campus even, and ways to get involved. Another thing that got me started on this path was banning polystyrene on my college campus back in the day. Contact us and we can get you connected with what's going on within your local government at the county level or on your campus to help move these issues forward.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I'm really looking forward to the future of our waste. Last but certainly not least is Delegate Jared Solomon. Delegate Solomon, it's a pleasure to see you again.
Thank you, Thomas. And I want to start off, first of all, by thanking you and the folks at Towson, and really thank Reese in particular, who you all have just been such champions on the Future Act. I'm really honored, frankly, that you all brought the bill to me and that we've been able to work together on it. And I want to just recognize Stacy and Jennifer, whose organizations, frankly, do incredible work. It's very much a collaborative process. We would not be able ever to get a lot of the great bills that we as legislators get to throw our names on. We would not be able to get them through if we're not for incredible advocates, frankly, at all levels and in all corners of the state. It really is a partnership. I've had the pleasure of working with the NAACP and their president, Willie, on an education bill, which is one of the other areas that I spend a lot of time on, and just wanted to recognize their work. And Jennifer, your organization does spectacular work down here. This has been a really tough session with a lot of the health concerns, obviously. And, frankly, I think it's been incredible the amount that we've been able to accomplish. Not obviously everything, but I think where we started out, where many of us were worried we would actually never make it to the end of session because of health concerns, we've been able to accomplish a tremendous amount. And so I wanted to recognize that. And I think both Stacy and Jennifer, said it best. It's hard to sort of put your finger on one bill in particular. And there's so many amazingly smart people down here and in the state of Maryland that every session, this is my third, there's probably 8 or 9 or 10 bills that could have, just huge positive impacts on the environment. And frankly, that's part of the trouble is sometimes the really good bills, there just isn't enough time or there isn't enough room for all of them. And sometimes it's just, the 90-day session calendar that we have means that sometimes it takes a couple of years to get really good bills through. It doesn't mean they're not ready for prime time. It just means sometimes it takes a little bit longer to get the right people on your side. So, a couple of those bills that have already been mentioned, the Transit Safety and Investment Act actually is a perfect example. That has really been years in the works. It started out really with a report that was offered when the dedicated funding for WMATA, for the metro system in the DC area, was put forward. That was before I was elected, but my colleagues and I was an involved advocate at that point, had put a provision in saying, we want to know what truly is the problem with our MTA system. What's the scope of the problem that we're facing. And that report was issued. And, a couple of years down the line, we are getting historic, frankly, reinvestment back into MTA, which touches every corner of the state. Obviously, it's mostly a Baltimore area function for the bus system, but the MARC rail system touches every portion of Maryland. And the least we can do is make sure that it's running properly. We need much greater expansion, but that's a first step. And then, the other bill that I wanted to touch on is the Climate Solutions Now Act, which, I want to give just tremendous recognition to Senator Pinsky, and my colleague in the House, Delegate Dana Stein, who have done real yeoman's work on that bill. And frankly, I think, it's probably one of the most far-reaching climate bills that we've worked on, certainly since I've been in the legislature, but probably in the last, decade or so. And, it's not done yet. I know there's been a lot of back and forth between the House and the Senate version, but, it looks like with, the last couple of days of session, we will get something that will have a major impact on climate, in the state of Maryland going forward. It may not be everything that everybody wants, but, legislating, unfortunately, sometimes is an incremental game. And so, my view is always if you can advance the ball, 60 or 70 yards down the field, or get 2/3 of a loaf versus getting nothing. It's always better to be making progress. And then lastly, I want to talk about the bill that we've spent so much time on, the Future Act. It's a mouthful to say the full name. So the Future Act is a much easier way to go about it. And that bill is really a recognition, frankly, of the role that our university systems play in our university system, and our colleges and universities across the state really play in contributing to climate and energy usage in the state of Maryland. And we typically find that universities tend to be the largest users of energy of any public building, across the state. And so, many of our universities have set out already great goals to be carbon neutral, but, how they get there and their timeline really varies. Some of them, like I'll call out the University of Maryland at College Park, has done an amazing job. They're really blessed. It's obviously our flagship campus, and, they're blessed with a lot of resources, and they've done really great work. And, President Lowe and now President Pines have really made a commitment to sustainability, that we think we'd love to see replicated across the system. And so what this bill does is it puts in place a timeline for, the lofty goals that many of our schools have already signed on to make sure that, by 2035, direct emissions, commonly referred to as Scope 1, purchased electricity, or Scope 2, and induced emissions, things like, air travel, or, the emissions that come as a result from students and staff commuting, and a whole host of sort of other ancillary issues are included as well. And we really made a commitment to environmental justice in that piece. So obviously, carbon neutrality is different than net zero. Carbon neutrality can be achieved by using offsets. And so it was a really, big priority for the students that we've been working with, and myself as well. And I should mention Senator Rosa Pepp, who has the pleasure of representing College Park as our cross-file in the Senate, and our partner over in the other chamber. It was a real commitment to make sure that if the universities and colleges are using offsets to achieve those goals, obviously we hope that, as they ramp up further and further, that we're not needing offsets, but when they are, that those offsets are being purchased and being, used in areas where we can improve communities that have been really hard hit by environmental racism. And so, I think we set a standard in this bill that we hope will actually start to create more of a marketplace. We know some of these don't always exist right now, particularly in the state of Maryland. So there are provisions in the bill to sort of accommodate that. But, especially the university system putting a marker down, and we as policymakers putting a marker down is really important. The other piece of the bill is just, frankly, some common sense, collaboration that we want to make sure the university system and all of our schools are doing. We're really hopeful, maybe not this year, but that we will achieve these goals. And again, I want to just give kudos to the students who have been really the leaders on this. And we've got students from across really every corner of Maryland, from almost every campus. And lastly, before I turn it back over to you, I think what you all can do is twofold. One, and we'll talk a little bit about this. Sometimes the biggest impediment is, frankly, the university system. They're a large bureaucracy that sometimes doesn't like being told what to do. It's kind of the nature of the game. And so you as students, you are really their consumers. You're their customers. They exist because you attend their universities and their colleges, and your tuition dollars pay for a lot of the resources that the schools have. And so being able to advocate within the university system, within your individual campus, to support this, to work with policymakers around these goals. And then, my other advice, not groundbreaking, especially, after Stacy and Jennifer, is really talking to your legislators. A lot of what we deal with in Annapolis, frankly, is folks who just really don't have the time. That 90-day session makes it really difficult to be an expert on everything. And our staffs are limited. Many of us are lucky if we've got one or two staff people, and oftentimes we maybe have only one full-time staffer. So part of the reason sometimes that these more complex bills take, more than 1 year to pass is because it takes a while to have those face-to-face interactions, those conversations with your legislators who, probably would support the bill, but may not know what it does, or may not know it well enough to be able to advocate within their committees or within their caucus for it. And so, really again, that's the benefit of having, so many great students on board is we've got such a diversity of geography here, to be able to talk to so many different lawmakers, not only on the committees of jurisdiction, but across the board to make sure that they support the bill. And so, happy to take some other questions, and again, really appreciate the invitation and being here with so many great advocates.
Thank you so much, Delegate Solomon. Fingers crossed for all of these very important pieces of legislation, but also a little personal bias for the Future Act. So, All right. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. Now we'll move on to our guided questions. Our moderators will lead a discussion with the panel with a series of questions previously submitted by students. Moderators, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again for having me here tonight. My first question is for Delegate Solomon, which is, what is the most significant hurdle and or obstacle you face in your current position that hinders pushing forward the green recovery?
Yeah, thank you, Reese. And again, thank you for your leadership. I mean, I think, frankly, I don't want to be negative. I think it's just sometimes the timing issues, the dynamic that we have in the General Assembly, again, for those of you that aren't super familiar with it, we are considered to be a part-time legislature. We're in for a 90-day session. We run usually from, the second week of January through the second week of April. And that means, frankly, it's sometimes really hard to, to get sort of more than one large bill, through the General Assembly. And it also means that, you're probably looking at a longer term, time horizon to be able to get people educated and be able to get bills, sort of in front of people. And, this year in particular, the dynamics of COVID have just made that even harder. And so, we sit down and we come up with these really great ideas in the interim, and it means, that those 90 days you spend doing what you can, but, sometimes a lot of issues beyond your control, can really pop in. Maybe it's that the committee that your bill goes to, has got a couple of other really critical issues, and they've just decided to sort of put all their energy into that. As I'm sure many of you are following, police reform, which is probably one of the most significant issues that we've dealt with this session, and probably since I've been in the legislature, has taken up a lot of time. Just on the floor, we've had, hours and hours of sessions. If you watch the Senate, they literally had, the Senate doesn't have sort of an official filibuster in Maryland, but there's an unofficial one. And they spent literally 3 hours talking about just one bill that we've already spent hours on, and there's still 4 or 5 others. So what that means is it's just, those bills are so important, but we only have so much time before we adjourn on Sine Die next Monday. And so that means that there are probably some good bills, that are not quite as critical or big or, headline grabbing as the police reform measures that we're working on, that may just run out of time. And because they run out of time, it doesn't mean that we can come back in May or in June and work on it like Congress does, where they've got those 2-year windows. That means that bill goes back, and those sponsors and those advocates that have worked on it have to start all over again next January. And so it's frustrating because these are issues, frankly, that can't wait. And when, it takes another year to get a bill in, even when you pass a bill, it doesn't go into effect immediately. It goes into effect, usually 3 or 4 months after it's officially signed into law. And, God forbid the governor vetoes it. That means you've got to wait, another 9 months. And so honestly, I will say sometimes it's really the calendar. And then when you pass a large piece of legislation, sometimes when you come back next year for other policies, a lot of other folks will say, well, we passed something really good last year. Let's give that a chance to be implemented. Let's see what comes out of that before we can pass anything else. And so sometimes sort of the structural makeup of our legislature, can really be, I think, a hindrance to really good policy.
Thank you so much. So the next question is for Ms. Kunzie. COVID-19 has shown us that we can quickly pivot as a nation in order to protect our collective survival. What lessons learned from the pandemic response do you think we need to lean in order to address climate change and environmental justice?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think we've seen so many things change over the course of the past year, and so many things change quickly a little over a year ago that I mean, it's been incredibly hard, but we've also seen so many local initiatives spring up through local people just talking to their neighbors and talking about what needs to change to see the need that is in front of them. And that's really something that we need to bring forward, especially as we're looking towards continued economic turmoil, as we're looking toward the climate crisis getting worse. We need to carry forward the power of all of the people who have brought up mutual aid networks in neighborhoods all across our cities and towns to get resources into the hands of people who need them. In the community center in my neighborhood, for example, operates a food pantry where before the pandemic, it was providing food for about 30 families a week. And within a couple of weeks of the pandemic hitting last year, it was providing food to about 600 families a week. And that really spoke to the need that was there. And you saw people really step up, provide their time, provide their resources to help make that happen. And in terms of advocacy, that's what we need to do. And in terms of building local solutions, that's what we need to do, is really lead at the local level and build networks with the people who we're connected with and the people local in our towns. I think an example of that is over the course of the pandemic, there's a local company here in Baltimore that works with restaurants to divert their food waste, manage their food waste, and really streamline getting their food waste into composting facilities. And they were just getting started when the pandemic hit, and obviously things drastically changed for restaurants. But over the course of the past year, they've worked with restaurants to move through that crisis and see the ways that managing their waste differently could help them handle the crisis and help save them money, because it's a lot cheaper to send your food waste to compost than to an incinerator or a landfill. And they focused a lot in Southeast Baltimore and the Fells Point area in particular. And now a huge number of the restaurants in Fells Point are using that system and diverting their food waste because it helped them manage all of the challenges of the pandemic. So I think there's a lot of need to lead at the local level, work where you're at to meet the need that's in front of you, but also look for those win-win solutions where we can address two crises at once. In this case, all of the economic problems that restaurants have been facing, but also all of the environmental problems that incinerator or landfilling waste cause. There's a lot of win-win solutions like that that we can look for if we try.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kunzie. Next question goes out to Ms. Hartwell. The topic of climate change and racism have gotten very political and partisan. How do we talk about these important issues without politicizing them? Is that even possible in this current political climate?
Thanks, Carly. You know what? When there are adults in the room, anything is possible. I would like to add that when you stick to the facts and you take the word "you" out of conversations, that removes a lot of the confrontation. So I would encourage people as they talk about these issues, and it's like in any healthy relationship, if you don't talk about the issues, they fester and they get worse and they cause bigger problems. So don't think that talking about, what you consider sensitive issues are really sensitive to the other person. They may be sensitive to you. So I'm going to say, remember, that you're the adult in the room, and that, difficult conversations are about being an adult, and it's healthy to clean out festering wounds. So please have those conversations. And you know what? I play a game, quite frankly. I was fortunate enough to live in an area that has a terrible reputation, history of race relations, in Boston, Massachusetts, at a time where it just was not popular to be African-American in that area. And I sort of enjoyed talking to people about like the most sensitive of subjects around race. And it would be amazing to you what you would hear come out of your mouth. And when you would think that it was like the worst thing, it was probably the healthiest thing that ever happened, and really helped to bridge some gaps. Like they say, get to know your neighbor, but don't cut down the hedge. So my point is, reach out to people, have those conversations, stick to the facts, and don't be afraid to talk about the tough issues first. That is kind of some basic stuff we kind of learned in kindergarten. So, Let's go there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next question is again for Delegate Solomon. When an industry has been shown to harm humans and alternative, healthier solutions are available, why is the scientific data not enough to shift policy?
Reese, that is a great question. One that's somewhat loaded. I'm trying to think of the most appropriate way to respond. I mean, first of all, science is real. I wish all of my colleagues believed in science and believed the facts as much as many of the rest of us do. But I think there's a couple of things. I think sometimes people rely on sort of their own lived experiences. And as legislators, they often rely on what they're hearing from their constituents or, the sort of people in their orbit. And some people are much better about getting outside of their orbit than others. And so, even when presented very specifically with scientific facts or with, immutable data, people can say, well, nobody's talking to me about this, or, I have, there's another scientist that's saying something different, or I haven't witnessed that or experienced that myself. And so, I think what I found to be really, really effective over the course of my policy career, even before being in the legislature, is really trying to personalize. I think, as Stacy was saying, trying to make it relevant to them, maybe not specific personal, but bringing stories in, talking about people that they represent, communities in their district. For a lot of folks, sometimes it comes down to the economic impact. If the science says one thing, but maybe it's not 100% conclusive, or, they can sort of find science maybe on both sides. If there's an economic impact that shows, changing this will cause X, Y, or Z, or will create, X, Y, or Z benefit. The other thing, frankly, is for a lot of legislators, it's still, about jobs. I'll go back to sort of I think somebody mentioned black liquor earlier, which is a reference to, what used to be considered a reusable energy source. And we had, one was a paper mill plant that has now actually since shut down just as a result of the economy. Although some folks may try to blame the legislature for doing it. That actually was not the case. And we knew black liquor was terrible. It's an awful source of, an incredibly dirty source of energy and pollution, but it was considered renewable, probably because of a special interest. And despite the fact that, for years and years and years, we had all been saying that there was a paper mill in an area of the state, frankly, that, is probably more economically depressed. And that paper mill employed a lot of good paying jobs. And so for a lot of people, it didn't matter that the science said, this was really terrible, because what's one more paper mill that's polluting the planet in the grand scheme of things? China's far worse than we are. So, we shouldn't figure out a way to do this. Or, I'd say the incinerator. There are some folks on organized labor side. We don't always see eye to eye, on environmental issues, because there's some good paying jobs at the incinerator. And my response would be we have to be able to find a way that we can, create a just transition for workers and preserve people's economic welfare while also keeping the planet safe and healthy and protecting our communities. But sometimes, you've got to look at it from a more sort of economic lens to really catch people's attention.
Thank you so much, Delegate. I have another question for Ms. Kunzie. We cannot ignore the fact that discriminatory policies of the past have directly led to the locations determined for toxic industries such as landfills and incinerators. How do we rectify this while continuing to dispose of our waste?
Yeah, I think it starts with not building more of these facilities in a discriminatory way. And we're not even at that point, really, as a state or as a country. Maryland had to fight off multiple trash incinerator proposals in the past decade or two. The nation's largest trash incinerator was slated to be built in South Baltimore, very close to the existing municipal incinerator, very close to a medical waste incinerator that incinerates like regionally a lot of the region's medical waste, and next to highways, which, as Stacy said, highways contribute really significantly to the air pollution that harms people's health. And we were about to build a new one in Maryland, and it had the blessing of a lot of elected officials at the time. Frederick's incinerator that was proposed, like I said, was going to be right next to the county jail, which is an enormous problem for equity. And I think, thanks to the hard work of a lot of residents in both places, a lot of local leaders, both of those facilities were stopped. But we need to just stop having those facilities proposed in communities that are already facing so much environmental burden and so many other burdens. And that one way to move towards that is to move really, really quickly, really, really strongly towards these zero waste solutions, like compost infrastructure that creates jobs without creating this kind of pollution, like eliminating single-use plastics, which can reduce the amount of waste that we're dealing with at the front end rather than needing to find a solution at the back end. And we really need to move much more quickly towards getting waste out of the stream that leads towards these polluting facilities. But another part of the solution is giving communities more say-so, more control over what's proposed to be built near them. And New Jersey just a couple months ago passed really landmark legislation on the issue of cumulative impacts, which is to say that if the state or whatever agency is considering a new polluting facility proposal, right now in Maryland, they just look at, well, how much pollution is that facility going to emit? And is that amount of pollution a problem? I'm simplifying things a little bit, but that's the basic how those decisions are made. And they're not going to look at, well, how much pollution is already there? Are we adding to a ridiculous amount that's already there? Is this going to make things so much worse for communities that are already dealing with a lot? And New Jersey's new legislation would say that, no, if this is a community that is already dealing with a lot of pollution, you, the company that wants to build a new facility, you're going to have to think about that and write a report about that. And if it's going to make things a lot worse for this community that's already dealing with a lot of pollution, we're going to have the right to deny the permit based on that reason. And making that kind of cumulative impact analysis a part of the decision-making for how new facilities are proposed, and empowering communities to have more of a voice in the regulatory and the permitting processes for these facilities is really, really important for making sure we're not building more harmful facilities in communities that have already been harmed enough, and bringing more democracy and accountability to the table.
Thank you. Ms. Hartwell, you wanted to respond?
Thank you so much for recognizing me. Jennifer, I mean, like, I was checking every box and you really covered many of them. I would like to add one additional thing. There are many facilities that exist in and around Maryland that are really gross offenders. And a lot of the reasons why they are offenders is because they are sometimes operating on permits that have expired. And there's a huge challenge to be able to get the local organizations responsible, the permitting offices, to police this. So we must be able to find a way to, number one, let them know what the upgrades are required and address those expired permits. Because you know what? If they were to have them updated, they probably would not be allowed, because it has an element in it that says, you know what, this is not to a current standard to address what the current laws say. So permitting is another big issue that we really cannot ignore, and expired permits. I just wanted to add that.
I'm glad you did.
I'm sorry to interject. Oh, I'm sorry, Carliana, but yeah, well, we have enough time for, I believe, one more question before we move on to the audience Q&A section.
Thank you. So finally, to Ms. Hartwell, many of the conversations concerning the climate crisis are segmented due to the highly complex nature of the program. How do we envision sustaining conversations such as the conversation we're having today? Whose responsibility is it to unify and broadcast these evolving conversations?
We all have a role in protecting our best interests. Sometimes people get distracted. But when we find august bodies such as yours, such as your voice, voices of our legislature, big organizations, the big green companies, organizations like the NAACP. I mean, the NAACP is a firebrand. It has a tremendous following. So I think just by nature of the brand that each of these organizations has built is a responsibility for them to continue to engage our constituents and our membership and always ask these questions. So everybody has a role, but I do believe that organizations should really carry the torch for keeping the conversations alive.
Excellent. I think that's a fantastic place to leave our guided panel discussion. Thank you, panelists. I would like to have our moderators now present some audience questions to the panel. Audience members, feel free to keep submitting questions as the conversation develops.
Thanks, Thomas. This question is from Taylor. As a student, something I found to be frustrating is that I have the access to all this information and therefore can become more knowledgeable about these problems. However, this information is not accessible to many others, including the general public. What advice or ideas do you have to expand this environmental knowledge for all?
Is someone in particular going to answer that question, or can we all chime in?
This is open to any of the panelists.
Oh, you know, I'm gonna put my 2 cents. I'm gonna put my 2 cents out there and say that you know, there's so many different ways to engage, and you know what? It's not necessarily what you know, but it's what you know that can help others. I find that if you reach out to fence line and frontline communities, they will tell you what is important to know. They will share with you what the issues are. And that's where you can dig deeper in your knowledge. You can drill down and know more. So, you know, if you're concerned about what you know, because I mean, you know, they say if you read 3 books, you know more than 80% of the people out there, you know, in the world. Go to someone who's fighting the battle, who's living in these front line, these overburdened communities. Check in with them about what you need to know, because that's the information that will help make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would add to that, that once you've done that, I think like the delegate spoke to, it's so incredibly hard for elected officials to, especially in Annapolis, have the time to really understand these issues. Is that one of the ways that you can really use that knowledge to make a difference, especially like Stacy said, in collaboration with people who are directly impacted. And after having talked with a lot of people who are directly impacted, work to help educate your own elected officials, because the people who represent you in Annapolis likely do not have the level of knowledge that you and that community members have. And they need to learn really quickly about a lot of different issues, and it's very, very hard. So bringing that knowledge to your elected officials, asking them for a meeting outside of the legislative session, not during session, and we're finding out what issues are going to be in front of them and working to educate them about what they need to know to make a good decision is really, really valuable.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that I would add is just don't be afraid to use your voice. You know, honestly, I've worked with incredible high school students, some incredible middle school students, you know, who you know, you might ordinarily think would be dismissed because they were too young. Trust your voice. We have been blessed, I think, particularly recently, with amazing student leaders, you know, in both Maryland and nationwide. And so join an organization that allows you to organize. Send messages to your friends. You know, oftentimes, even just when an election is coming up, if there's candidates, you know, who you think, you know, have a particular bent one way or the other with environmental policy, send a note out to your friends saying, hey, you know, I know these issues may be important to you, but maybe you didn't get a chance to track them. Here's who I'm voting for, and here's why. Or, you know, if there's an important issue before the legislature that you want friends or family in your life to be able to weigh in on, send an email out. I think you'd be surprised how excited and pleased people would be, because there's so much of a crush of information. When you get something from somebody you trust, people pay a lot more attention to it.
And I'd like to just add, Delegate Jared, about, you mentioned 2 of the very important V's, which is volunteer and lend your voice. Another one too is vote. Those are the 3 V's above anything. You know, you really, Yeah, we really got to get there and exercise our vote. So.
Okay, if that is everyone, next we have a question from Jillian Fry. Experts who study the food system and climate have concluded that two issues need to be addressed: reduce food waste and reduce meat and dairy products production/consumption. Do you see opportunities for policies in Maryland to help shift our diets towards these plans? Towards plants.
Delegate, were you about to? Go ahead.
No, well, Jennifer, you mentioned one of them, the composting bill. The other one that I wanted to mention was from my colleague from Montgomery County, who's actually been working on this for a number of years, Delegate Gilchrist. He had just want to make sure I get the name of the bill right. It was the Maryland Green Purchasing and Food and Beverage Procurement Greenhouse Gas Emissions Act. It's not a great title, but that's the formal name of it. It was House Bill 317, and I think it's sitting over in the Senate. We passed it. That's about, at least within sort of state procurement, really trying to put an emphasis on more vegetarian and less sort of carbon heavy foods. And I know it's an issue that Delegate Gilchrist has worked on. And frankly, we've had some conversations within the Appropriations Committee where we allocate the money on making sure that the money is going, doing things within, our state procurement and the state budget to try to emphasize that. And I don't know if you all have read it, but there was a great piece in the Atlantic, I guess actually just yesterday, from Annie Lowry, basically saying is your diet killing the planet? And the two big issues that she focuses on are food waste and trying to eat, a slightly less meat intensive diet. She's not advocating that everybody should become vegans, but basically the premise of the article is if we were able to, dramatically reduce food waste and shift our diets away from so much meat, we could have an even bigger impact on climate change than, most of the renewable energy policies that we're talking about. So I would highly recommend folks taking a look at that.
And you'd have a cleaner colon.
I was going to say, I think the diets that tend to be most healthy for the planet also tend to be most healthy for all of us. So.
Mm-hmm. And I would add too that as a student, you have a pretty large voice to make a big impact on pretty large institutions, because college campuses are big producers of food waste, and a lot more of them are composting now than when I was in college, which wasn't even that long ago. And they also are big purchasers of food. So you can look at what your own college is doing in terms of where are they separating out their food waste, where are they sending it, and where are they procuring their food? Are they making an effort to purchase from local growers? Does the cafeteria have good vegetarian food? I remember that was an effort when I was a student as well to get and I'm vegetarian myself, to get the vegetarian meals to be a little bit more appealing so that more people would choose them. And I think that there's those kinds of little, big in impact, but little in sort of policy tweaks that you can do on your campus as a student to help shift the needle in that direction.
Well, thank you, everyone. So the next question I have is for Delegate Solomon from Darius. How has COVID-19 affected pollution, policy, and environmental attitudes in Maryland?
Yeah, that is a great question. I'll say, there's sort of two pieces that come immediately to mind, I think, that are very concrete. One is, I think there is a tremendous recognition among legislators about the importance of green space. And that in and of itself is an environmental justice issue. I started my career teaching in Baltimore City at Northwestern. And, when you drive through neighborhoods in Baltimore, it is very clear that there are huge swaths of the city that do not have readily available access to parks and green space, versus parts of Montgomery County, where within a matter of minutes, you can walk to almost, 4 or 5 different parks or major areas. And that is not fair. And that's not right. And in a year where, there has been a huge importance and emphasis put on being able to get outside and not be cooped up in maybe in many instances, shoddy housing or, really cramped quarters. I think for mental health, for health as well, for all other types of health, being able to get outside and use that green space has been huge. And so I think, many of my colleagues and policymakers in Annapolis really understand the importance of that. And we did 2 things actually in the budget, that may not seem all that sexy, but will have huge ramifications. We invested $85 million in a parks fund that's going to be distributed across the state to all 24 jurisdictions. And we restored money into program open space, which is available for jurisdictions to use to finance parks. So I think that will go a long way. The other piece that I would say that's been very concrete and is something, frankly, that runs through literally the heart of my district is the fight that many of you may be familiar with over widening 495 and 270 or the Beltway if you're in the DC area. And, we've been fighting, frankly, the governor on that issue, who claims it's actually beneficial to climate change because we won't have cars idling on the Beltway anymore, but we'll just have 4 more lanes of traffic. Excellent, Jennifer. I agree with that thumbs down. And so, we have a mega project here that could potentially be one of the largest P3s, public-private partnerships in the country, where we would potentially turn over public infrastructure in a really short-sighted way to a private company, potentially for the next 50 or 100 years, when COVID has dramatically changed the way that people commute. There was a study that was just recently released that showed literally just because of, the change in commuting patterns, DC has gone from being one of the most congested metropolitan areas in the world to 12th. And so, we know that people are not going to go back to work the way they have before, even when things return to normal. People enjoy working from home, and I think they'll enjoy it even more when they're able to go out to a restaurant or, leave their house in the evenings instead of only being at home. And so, to move forward on a project like this, when we don't know the ramifications of commuting patterns because of COVID, it's just so, short-sighted. There are a lot of other words that come to my mind that are not fully appropriate. And so many of us have been working to, I have a bill, several of my colleagues from Montgomery County have bills that we've been working on, to change that. First and foremost, making sure that at the very least we have a full traffic analysis of the impact of COVID, but really thinking about what our commuting patterns are going to look like and how, frankly, our policy should shift with that. I wish some of our colleagues had a more holistic, comprehensive view of that as well. But I think those are sort of 2 concrete examples of COVID's influence on policy here.
Thanks, Delegate Solomon. Our next question comes from Jacob. This goes out to all of the panelists. How do you convince individuals who don't think there is a problem with pollution and relying on non-renewable resources to embrace the concepts of carbon neutrality, zero waste, and a complete shift to renewable resources?
It can definitely be hard. For those of us in the field, often the amount of evidence can be so overwhelming that it can be hard to think about the answer to that question. But I think it's important to meet the person where they're at. So find out what they are concerned about. Maybe they're worried about financial impacts on themselves and on their local governments and municipalities. So you can talk about, well, climate change is going to create such a fiscal problem for local governments. It's going to disrupt food systems and make it so much harder to get food locally, make it increasingly important. We're going to have to change the economy. I think finding out what issues that person is already interested in, and then connecting that with the climate crisis and connecting that with pollution impacting people's health is really the way to open the door to that conversation.
Oliver, I just wanted to add, sometimes you don't always have to convince everybody. I think that's something that I've learned being down here, and it's great to talk about bipartisanship, and it's great to talk about everybody getting along, and you can disagree without being disagreeable. I think it's a really important phrase in our current political climate, but there are times where, because of one reason or another, you're never going to convince somebody to vote for or support a piece of legislation. And so, I think sometimes we let the perfect be the enemy of the good. You only need a certain number of votes to override a veto. You only need a certain number of votes to pass a bill. And, rather than trying to convince everybody, it's being really strategic. And we're blessed, again, with so many great organizations in the state who understand that. But it's really being critical of, I know I need a certain number of votes on this committee. How do I tailor a bill so it goes to one committee or another? because in one committee, I may not be able to get the votes because of the makeup of it, but in the other committee, there's a lot more folks who are on my side. And once the bill gets out of that committee, it's probably going to get the votes it needs to become, to become a law. So it's really, teaming up with, I think, the organizations that kind of know the landscape and learning, how Annapolis works so that you can get the most bang for your buck. And I said Oliver, I meant Olivier. My apologies on that one.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. I'm sorry to interject, but we only have about 5 minutes remaining. Moderators, thank you so much for the work you've done this evening. Panelists, we'd be happy to hear any closing remarks you may have. I'll start with Ms. Hartwell.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Again, the 3 V's, volunteer, vote, and lend your voice, but I'm going to add another one here. And, I'm going to put myself out there. I'm not a pretentious person, but, when I was in my career, they said that everyone should have a mentor. And I want to speak to this audience today that not only should you have a mentor, but you should be a mentor. I think everyone over a certain age, I'm going to put out 50. I'm not saying anything to anyone else. I'm going to put out 50. Go and mentor a person over 50. There are so many things that you all have. You're so smart. I've worked with many people in your generation, your age group that are just, you guys are, I think it's because you have the access to the technology and just you're really in tune to what makes a difference in making your peers happy, that I think is really important, and you're driven by humanitarianism. I think that it's important for you to share your abilities as a younger person with someone who's a little bit older. And I'm going to put it out there, I'm the worst tweeter in America. I don't understand how you leverage hashtags and @ symbols and doing all that stuff so that your tweets are amplified and you check the analytics and all this sort of stuff. But I had the pleasure of getting from the university, one of your competitors, another university. We got 2 policy interns this year, and they tell you something, they have taught me so much. And, I in turn share my wisdom with them. They share their smarts with me. It has been such a fantastic and rewarding collaboration. I'm going to miss them when they go. They're our spring cohort. Maybe we'll get a summer cohort, but I'm really going to miss them. So I really want to encourage you to not only find a mentor, but become a mentor to someone who's over 50. That's it.
Thank you so much. Ms. Kunzie.
Yeah, I would say in addition to that, or I think very much in tandem with that, don't wait to get involved in making policy changes and getting involved in your local government. I think as a student, you can have a really, really large voice in making a change in Annapolis, and especially making a change at your city and county level government, which often doesn't get as much attention. But really, really consequential decisions about budgeting, about policies that impact schools, about solid waste management, so many other things happen at that very, very local level that not as many people and not as many young people as well pay attention to. And what really got me on the path to working on environmental policy, I didn't study it in undergrad, I didn't study it in school, but I got involved as a volunteer. I got passionate about this in high school with this incinerator proposal in Frederick. And then I volunteered on a lot of environmental issues on campus and political issues in Annapolis as a college student. And just getting as involved as you can where you're at right now is the best way to learn how the system works and how you can make a difference in it. You don't need to wait until after you're graduated to start getting involved in that way. You should do it about whatever issue you're passionate about as soon as you can.
Yeah, I was going to say Jennifer actually stole a lot of my thunder. It's always great being with so many other smart people. All politics is local, and so much of what we do in Annapolis, often if we're not able to get an issue through statewide, the sort of pivot is, well, let's get it in a couple of different counties first. And then, then we can come back and say, well, Baltimore City or Montgomery County or Prince George's, the largest jurisdictions in the state, they're already doing it. And so, it's really not that big of a deal. We've seen, areas with 1 million people and 600,000 people can get it done, we can implement it across the rest of the state. So, sometimes it's really the shiny sort of sexy objects of what's going on in Washington or, what's in the headlines are where people put their attention. But to Jennifer's point, I mean, so much amazing work can be done, even at the local municipal level. If you live in an incorporated area, with a council where you may only have to convince literally 3 people or working at your county. The other thing I would say, especially for the students on the call, is we have an amazing internship program in Annapolis. This year's a little bit harder. It's all being done virtually because we're really limited with the number of people on campus here in Annapolis. But ordinarily, we've got students in and out of our office. We've had usually 2 interns in my office a year, from various campuses, and it pays. And it's real substantive work. You're not just answering the phones and responding to mail. You're literally taking constituent meetings. You're sitting in hearings. You're presenting on bills. We've had our interns do that. And again, it's paid. We really make sure that folks are able to get resources they need. So I would encourage you all to be a part of that. And the last thing I would say is, there is an election coming up, in 2 years. We'll have a new governor. Governor Hogan is term limited, so we will have a new governor regardless. And we are a state where the executive wields tremendous power. That's another limitation by having a part-time legislature. We're only in session for 90 days, and so really looking closely at who the candidates are that are running, what their environmental platform is, and how you can hold them accountable. And same thing with the state legislators. Every House and Senate seat will be up. And will have a huge impact on policies related to the environment going forward in Annapolis for years to come. So really, I encourage you all to get involved, vote, as Stacy said, and hopefully we'll see you all in Annapolis. And I put my contact information in the chat. Be happy to show you around or answer questions on anything environmental related or anything else. And just really appreciate the chance to be here with you all tonight.
And there you have it. Once again, I would like to thank our top-notch panel, our brilliant student moderators, TU Global Dialog social media intern Carly Perry, the Office of Sustainability, the Office of Civic Engagement and Social Responsibility, and you, our wonderful audience. I would also like to acknowledge Assistant Director of Civic Engagement Luis Sierra for all of his contributions to tonight's event and his overarching efforts for the Towson University community throughout the years. We wish you well in your future endeavors. Thank you so much for joining Towson University as we all look to overcome the obstacles on the path towards solving climate by 2030. One last request is that you let us know your thoughts on this event. Please fill out the brief participant survey on the link on the screen, which we will also email to those who registered. Thank you in advance for your valuable feedback. It has been an honor to lead this event. I hope you've all enjoyed yourselves tonight and feel re-energized in your drive to make the world a better place. Together, we can change ourselves, our schools, our communities, our states, our nations, and our planet. Thank you.